Luke chapter 19, beginning in verse 27. There's the Joneses. I just asked about them. Welcome. Good to see y'all. This verse 27 is the conclusion of the parable that we've been studying about for the last couple of weeks in Luke chapter 19, the parable of the pounds. You remember that the parable was that a nobleman had gone to a far country to be appointed or anointed a king. And there were some folks there, when they heard about that, they didn't want this guy to be their king. And of course, the parallel to that is Jesus and his receiving the kingdom. Him being a spiritual king, there were those among the Jewish people, many of the biggest majority of them, did not want him to be the king either. And so notice verse 27, this is the conclusion of the parable. Verse 27, Luke chapter 19. But those my enemies which would not that I should reign over them, bring hither and slay them before me. Now he's talking about the folks now back in verse 14. His citizens hated him and sent a message after him saying, we will not have this man to reign over us. We don't want him. And of course, this nobleman came back as king. We remember that he had picked out 10 chosen servants. He had given all of them a pound apiece. And so the day of reckoning, they needed to stand before him and tell him what they've done with this pound that he received from it. They all received freely from him. And of course, we noticed that there was one who took his pound and kept it. He didn't do anything with it. But we notice also, after he's dealt with his servants here, he said, bring those folks here to me that didn't want me to be their king. His faithful servants had been rewarded, but these enemies are going to be destroyed. And so, of course, that's going to be the same thing with us one day with Christ. Notice 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 before we move on now in Luke chapter 19. 2 Thessalonians chapter 1. Now, how does all this apply to you and I today? I guess everyone sitting here this morning is a baptized believer. We've all been baptized, and that's a good thing. That is absolutely necessary. 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, beginning in verse 4, so that we ourselves glory in you in the churches of God. Notice what they're glorying, they're happy about, pleased with, because of your patience and your faith, and through all the persecutions and tribulations that you folks endure. You're still patient, you're still faithful to the Lord, even though you're being persecuted. The early members of the church were terribly persecuted because they believed that this man Jesus was the Christ, and the majority of the people didn't believe that. They didn't want this guy reigning over them. They didn't want him as their king, and of course that's the parable back in Luke chapter 19. Notice verse 5, that this is a manifest token of the righteous judgment of God. That here it is, that you folks that are persecuted and have tribulation, you're going to be counted worthy of the kingdom of God for which also you suffer. This is the folks, the faithful folks, the people who back in Luke 19 who received given. Notice verse 6. Seen it's a righteous thing with God also to recompense or repay tribulation to them that trouble you. Those who resisted, those who said, we don't want this guy to be our king, we're not going to have him ruling over us. It's the best thing that God can do for them is to pay them back with the problems that they've caused other people. No, verse 7, and to you who are in trouble, rest with us. Y'all who have been persecuted and gone through all these tribulations, you can rest with us. Because when the Lord Jesus shall be revealed from heaven with his mighty angels, he's coming in flaming fire. He's going to take vengeance on them that know not God, who resisted this king, and that obey not the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. Verse 9, these people are going to be punished with everlasting destruction from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of his power. And that, of course, is what we're talking about in Luke chapter 19 and verse 27. Bring those enemies to me now. And notice verse 7. The Lord is coming in flaming fire, taking vengeance on them that know not God, taking vengeance on them that obey not the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. Well, of course, that's the folks, Andy, that were not baptized. the people who did not obey the gospel of Christ. That's when the folks that never were baptized. And of course, that is literally true.
Plus others.
Plus others. Could I be the 1 pound man that took what I was freely given and hid it in my handkerchief?
Yes.
Yes. Is that any good?
No.
But Andy, now we're comparing this to those who have never obeyed the gospel of Christ. I was baptized.
To obey the gospel of Christ, baptism is the beginning point, but not the end of the point. There's things after that one must do to be obedient to the gospel.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And baptism is absolutely necessary. That is the beginning point. We have to be baptized. I believe that fully. But as Andy said, that's just the beginning. That's the start. That's not the conclusion of my obedience to the gospel of Christ. Our obedience, my obedience to the gospel of Christ is a daily event. I've been freely given this, just like the guy in Luke chapter 19 who had been freely given the 1 pound just like everybody else, but he didn't do anything with it. And I suspect that he was probably punished because he did nothing with it. And I don't want my obedience to the gospel of Christ simply amounting to my baptism, and I never added much to it. I never made much of a diligent effort to do anything with what I'd been freely given. Anyone have any comment? But before we go further into Luke chapter 19. Notice now verse 28, Luke chapter 19, verse 28. We'll read down through, verse 35, I guess. And when he had thus spoken, he went before, ascending up to Jerusalem. And it came to pass, when he comes nigh to Bethphage and Bethany, at the mount called the Mount of Olives, he sent 2 of his disciples, saying, y'all go to the village over against you, into which at your entering you shall find a colt tied, whereon yet never man sat. Loose him and bring him here. If a man ask you, why do you loose him? Thus shall ye say unto him, because the Lord hath need of him. And they that were sent went their way, and found even as he had said unto them. And as they were loosing the colt, the owners thereof said unto them, why are you loosing the colt? And he said, the Lord hath need of him. And they brought him to Jesus, and they cast their garments upon the colt, and they sat Jesus on the back of this colt. Now notice as we go back to verse 28, Jesus now is very close to Jerusalem. Remember, he began this journey back in Luke chapter 9, verse 51. He's up in Capernaum, up on the northern end of the Sea of Galilee, and he's told these apostles, it's time for me to go to Jerusalem. The time has come. And so he's made up his mind. He's on his way to Jerusalem now. Apparently, from verse 28 here, he went before. He's leading the way. He's I think I've been back in the middle, at least in the middle of the crowd, or in the back in case something happens. At least I can dart over into the bushes and hide. But apparently Jesus, he was going before all of them. He's up there leading the way. As we're going to see in our study this morning, this group of people traveling with Jesus has become very large. There's lots of folks with him now. And it's going to pick up steam as they go further in or get closer to Jerusalem. We're going to see, Linda, that this is what we sometimes call the triumphal entry into Jerusalem by Jesus. He's going to be riding on the back of a borrowed donkey. This new king that they're anticipating is going to ride into Jerusalem on the back of a borrowed donkey. That ain't much of a triumphal entry. The blind man is probably with him. If you go back to Luke chapter 18 and verse 34, I think it is, or 43, or whatever it is, after he was healed, the blind man began to praise God, and he joins the group of people going through Jerusalem, going their way to going through Jericho on the way to Jerusalem. Zacchaeus, we have the account of him there, and what happened to him. This crowd is going to continue to grow as Jesus passes through Jericho and he comes now to the Mount of Olives. These folks are still expecting now that they're going to anoint a king, a physical king, when they get to Jerusalem. We're going to see that. These folks are excited about this. They're all worked up about this, and we're fixing to appoint us a king. Notice this happening is going to be in the final days of Jesus. Notice John chapter 12. We're going to be referring to John chapter 12 here frequently this morning. John chapter 12, verse 1. Then Jesus, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, which had been dead, whom he had raised from the dead. When Jesus is finally getting to Bethpage at Bethany here this morning, in 6 days, he's going to observe this Passover feast. 6 days, he's going to observe what we call the Last Supper. You know, his days are numbered. It ain't going to be long. Notice Matthew chapter 26 and verse 1. Notice how these days are passing off pretty quickly. Matthew chapter 26 and verse 1. If I can find it here. Here we go. And it came to pass when Jesus had finished all these sayings, he said unto the disciples, verse 2, you know that after 2 days is the feast of the Passover. 2 more days we're going to observe the feast of the Passover. By this time, of course, he's made it into Jerusalem. But these days are passing off very quickly. And did Jesus know this as he starts towards now Jerusalem? He's on the Mount of Olives now. Did he know what was fixing to happen?
Yes.
Sure he did. You could just turn back a page. Let me get back to Luke here. Luke chapter 18, verse 31. They're still on their way to Jerusalem. They're getting close. Luke 18, verse 31. And he took him to the 12 apostles. And he said to these 12 apostles, look, we're going up to Jerusalem, and all things that are written by the prophets concerning the Son of Man shall be accomplished. When we get there, he's going to be delivered to the Gentiles. He could be mocked. He's spitefully entreated. He'll be spit on. And they're going to scourge him and put him to death. And the third day he's going to rise again. In verse 34, these apostles understood none of these things. Yeah, he knew what was going to happen when they get there. And so when as we go back to Luke chapter 19, he's going before the group. He's not hiding. I think I've been scratching my head sitting back, on the side of Jericho, thinking, well, maybe we ought to rethink this, Edgar, and maybe we'll put it off a little while. Maybe we'll wait till the Passover is over with and everybody goes home, and it won't be such a big thing when we get to Jerusalem. Notice verse 29. Anyone have any comment?
Ricky, that's one thing that makes the crucifixion of the Master so beautiful a story of love. Jesus knew what he was here for.
Mm-hmm.
He knew what he was facing.
Mm-hmm.
He knew what he was facing. Even when he went to the Father, Father, if there be any other way, let this cup pass from me. Mm-hmm. He went willingly with full knowledge that he was going to suffer and bleed for humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that makes it,
What was he fully human at this point? Human.
He was 100% deity and 100% man.
I agree. Anthony?
One thing I noticed through this reading that I can't believe I've never noticed before, but they said that nobody had ever sat on this donkey, and they sat him on there.
Yeah.
That in and of itself is spectacular, because you're not just going to sit on an animal for the first time, and it allowed you to be there.
No.
That it actually allowed him
to sit there.
Right.
Yeah. I noticed that too.
That's truly amazing.
Yeah. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. A young donkey that nobody's ever rid. He ain't just green broke. Ain't nobody ever sat on this thing.
I'm not just going to climb on him and go for it.
No, I don't want to ride a donkey anyway, especially one that ain't broke. Burnell.
This is the first time Jesus has been in this country in a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And he showed them his power, his authority here. He told them that to go and get the donkey and bring him to him. That strengthened their faith in him by doing this. They didn't know it was a donkey around there any place.
No.
And he probably didn't either in a way, but yet he said, go and get the donkey and bring him to me.
Mm-hmm.
So that strengthened their faith in his belief or his teachings.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was going to say is, it just shows the faith of the Lord that He knows all things.
Absolutely. They're not going to get in their pickup truck with a cattle trailer behind it and drive over yonder. They're walking. And you want me to go get a donkey over yonder from where you said it's tied there? Is he going to be there when I get there? Well, they didn't question any of that. As Burnell said, they just went. Showed their faith in him. Notice verse 29 here. Verse 29. And it came to pass when he was come nigh or close to Bethphage and Bethany, at the mount called the Mount of Olives, he's going to send two of his disciples. He's getting close to Bethphage and Bethany. Both of these villages are located on the Mount of Olives. Matthew chapter 21 and verse 1 says that he was at Bethphage. Mark and Luke says that he got close to Bethphage and Bethany. Now Bethphage is a village located on the Mount of Olives. That of course is what we just read there in verse 29. If you can see my little geography drawing up here, you may not want to see it. But we have the Mount of Olives here on the east side of Jerusalem. It's going to be separated by this valley here, the Kidron Valley. This is something that we read about often in the Old Testament. Right down in the bottom of this thing, they call it a brook, I think. It's a creek, runs right down through the middle of it. Jesus now has made his way to the Mount of Olives. Bethany and Bethphage, these two little villages are up here on this mount. We're going to see here in a little bit, that's where the Garden of Gethsemane is. And we're going to see that it's not very far from here, for where Jesus starts down, and to where he gets to Jerusalem. It's not very far at all. In fact, Jesus sat on the Mount of Olives at one time, and he looked across there at the temple in Jerusalem, and he wept over the city of Jerusalem, and he wept over the temple there. So at any rate, we're going to see all those things. But Bethany and Bethphage, as well as the Mount of Olives, is east of Jerusalem. Bethany, of course, what noted family lived in Bethany? He raised him from the dead. Lazarus. That's where Mary and Martha and Lazarus lived. Notice John chapter 11. Jesus had been to Bethany before. That's where he raised Lazarus from the dead. I don't know how long it's been since that occurred. John chapter 11, verse 1, now there was a certain man that was sick named Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary, and her city and her sister Martha. That's where they lived. It was in Bethany. And Jesus is going through the Mount of Olives now, and he's going to go through Bethphage, and he's going to go through Bethany. We're going to see that Jesus is going to spend some time there in Bethany, going back and forth from Jerusalem to Bethany. Notice Matthew chapter 21, verse 17. Jesus is going to spend some time. In fact, apparently he's going to spend the night with Mary and Martha at times, as he is in Jerusalem before the Passover feast. Matthew chapter 21 and verse 17, after Jesus leaves the temple, he left them and went out of the city into Bethany, and he lodged there. He stayed there. And I don't know if he stayed with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus or not, but probably he is. They're friends. But at any rate, he always goes back to Bethany to spend the night. But now notice John chapter 11. We're having a little geography lesson here for what it might be worth to you. John chapter 11, verse 18. He's gone back to Bethany. Verse 18, now Bethany was nigh close to Jerusalem. It was about 15 furlongs off. How much is a furlong?
It's about 2 miles, 15.
One furlong? No.
No, it's about 2 miles. 15 is about 2 miles.
Oh, okay. I said 1 furlong is 2 miles. We're 15 furlongs away. A furlong, by my research, is anywhere from 600 to 625 feet. If we got 15 furlongs and they're each 600 feet long, that would be about 9,000 feet. That'd be about 1.5 miles. If you figured it 625, it'd be about 2 miles. So we're a mile and a half or 2 miles from the Mount of Olives here, across this little valley here to Jerusalem. It's not very far. You know, it'd be like from here to Pine Hill Church over here. You know, I don't know. That's about a mile and a half or so, something like that. You know, if you're in good shape, good condition, that's not a very long way to walk. Well, so we're getting really close now to Jerusalem. Bethpage and Bethany, they're both on the Mount of Olives. They're both small villages located close to one another. Mount of Olives on the eastern side of Jerusalem, with this valley of Kidron between them. Notice Matthew chapter 26. Jesus is going to cross this valley here. Matthew chapter 26, verse 30. I can turn one more page. Jesus in Jerusalem, now he's observed the Last Supper. He's observed the Passover feast for the last time. Matthew 26, verse 30, and when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. They're in Jerusalem over here. They're going to go over here to the Mount of Olives. So he's going to have to go down this valley, cross the creek here, go up to the Mount of Olives. Notice verse, I think it's verse 36. Let me see. Yeah. He's on his way to the Mount of Olives. Then cometh Jesus with them unto a place called Gethsemane, that is on the Mount of Olives. And of course, that's where Jesus was betrayed by Judas. So Judas had only to travel this mile and a half or 2 miles to get over to the Mount of Olives there. That was probably nothing for them. So that was a short distance for them. You know, from us today, Linda, we probably wouldn't want to walk a mile. You know, I'd rather drive than walk. Let's get on the four-wheeler. We'll ride over there. But notice verse 30. Anyone have any comment?
I do.
Go ahead.
You know, I like Matthew 21 better than all three of them, all two of them.
Okay.
It says he said bring both
Yeah.
the donkey and the coat to him.
Yeah.
Well, that was probably a reason. This is my reason.
No, go ahead.
The coat had not been weaned.
Yeah.
And he had to have his mother with him.
Yeah.
So that's why he said, bring both the donkey and the coat with you.
Yes.
So that's my interpretation of that chapter.
Okay. And we're going to get there in just a minute. But yeah, Matthew chapter 21 says that there was the mama donkey and this coat. And they brought them both. Edgar, have you ever heard the expression, sometimes you want to catch the cow, the calf, you got to pet the cow? If you want to catch the cow, sometimes you got to pet the calf. You know, I think, and that's what Burrell is alluding to here. I think that they're probably both of them were there, and they just brought the mama along with this donkey who had never been broke, never been ridden on. He's young, and so it just to pacify her, to ease the stress of this young donkey. And Arlene, we're not talking about Colt Martin now when we talk about a donkey. We're talking about a real donkey.
What?
You don't need to comment. Burnell?
I think it's the 10th chapter of Mark. I don't think it even mentions anything about a horse, a donkey, does it?
Let's see, is it Mark,
Yes, I
Mark
remember
chapter 10 or Mark chapter 11?
John 1, they don't mention, they do mention Hosanna there, which
Yeah.
we'll talk about later, but I don't know if they even, I remember they didn't even talk about a donkey in one of those chapters.
Mark chapter 11 and verse 2, go to the village auction, you'll find a coat tied there. So.
Yeah. And John chapter 12, it says that Jesus, when he had found a young donkey, he sat there on it. So yeah, they all four mentioned a donkey.
All
But
three.
Matthew 21 says that it was the mama and the colt.
Mark does too.
Mark does too, but it's only one, the young colt. Matthew's the only one that mentions the two.
Yeah.
Okay. But where was we? Notice verse 30. Anyone else have anything to say? Verse 30, they're on the Mount of Olives. He tells these two disciples, but he doesn't name them, go into the village over against you, and you're going to, in the which that you're entering in, you'll find a colt tied, whereupon yet never man sat. Loose him and bring him hither. Now we're close to Jerusalem, 1.5 to 2 miles. Jesus is going to send two disciples to a village that is over against you. Now, Luke says we're in either Bethpage or Bethany here. Matthew 21 says we're in Bethpage. Jesus is saying, you two men here, go to the next village over here. It's close, but probably maybe that was either Bethpage or Bethany. I don't really know. But y'all go over there, and the village that's coming up here, you're going to find a donkey tied. Go with it to Matthew chapter 21. This is what Burnell was just referring to there. Matthew chapter 21, verses 1, 2, 3. They drew nigh unto Jerusalem, then they were come to Bethpage, and unto the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent two disciples, told them, go over to the village over against you, and straight you're going to find a donkey tied, and a colt with her. Loose them and bring them here. If a man say aught unto you, shall say, the Lord hath need of them, and straightway he will send them. Notice verse 7, they brought the donkey and the colt, and he put on them their clothes, and they set him on them, both of them. How are they going to ride two donkeys? It's hard enough, as Anthony said, to ride this one donkey that's never been broke. I don't think he means literally he's going to ride the two donkeys now. He's going to ride the colt. But yeah, there were two donkeys mentioned there in Matthew chapter 21, the colt and its mother. And of course, the colt is the younger donkey. And I just told Arlene, Dustin, that we're not talking about Colt Martin. We're talking about a real donkey here now. So don't get Colt mixed up with this colt here. Go ahead.
I think nowhere in the New Testament it talks about a horse. It does talk about the donkey, but that's
okay.
Horses. They were very expensive during the biblical times.
Okay.
Only the rich people owned a horse.
Yeah, that's true.
Solomon owned horses.
Mm-hmm.
And it was only used in warfare and pulling chariots. So nobody in the New Testament they never ever rode a horse. So that's why horses wasn't plentiful, or they were probably plentiful, but they could not afford a horse.
Yeah.
They probably bought a donkey or a horse for $10 or something like that.
Yeah. And only rich folks and royalty rode horses. But now notice this. This is Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem. Now he's going to ride on a donkey, a borrowed donkey, an unbroken donkey. He's going to ride this thing into Jerusalem. I don't, people who ride donkeys on TV today, it's sort of a funny event if you're riding a donkey. Edgar, you remember the donkey basketball games they used to have around here? Yeah. They don't have them anymore, do they? No. I guess the Animal Society for Prevention of Cruelty did away with the donkey basketball game. But if you went to see one, it was funny. I don't think the donkeys enjoyed it so much, but these people riding the donkeys, it was funny. Jesus now, he's sitting on the back of this young, unbroken donkey going into Jerusalem. Can you imagine? Can you imagine people saying, I don't want him as my king. Here he comes into Jerusalem on the back of a donkey. A donkey. Now, what does this look like? He's riding this donkey. Jesus had walked all the way, apparently, from Capernaum in sandals. It was hot and it was dusty. Now, all of a sudden, he's going to get on the back of this donkey. Go back with me to John chapter 12. John chapter 12, we'll start again in verse 1. Read it a few minutes ago. John chapter 12, verse 1. Then Jesus, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, which had been dead, and him raised from the dead. Notice verse 2 and 3. There they made him a supper, and Martha served, just like she did in John chapter 11. Lazarus was one of them that sat at the table with Jesus. Verse 3, then Mary took a pound of ointment of spikenard, very costly, and anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the odor of the ointment. Why did Mary wash Jesus' feet? Why didn't you just go jump in the shower to get, you know, it feels better when you get a shower when you're dusty and tired and sweaty and all this kind of stuff. Wasn't no shower. The best thing they could do maybe was to wash one another's feet to just refresh their guests here. And I think that's what Mary was doing for Jesus. You know, he apparently spent the night there. Notice verse 12 there, John chapter 12, verse 12. On the next day, much people that were come to the feast, when they heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, apparently maybe he spent the night with Mary, Martha, Lazarus. At least he spent the night in Bethany anyway. And the next day, he's fixed to go into Jerusalem now. You know, so he's telling these folks now, go in there and borrow that donkey. And I'm going to ride a borrowed donkey into Jerusalem. You know, that's not much of a triumphal entry. No, go with me back to Esther. Remember the Old Testament book of Esther? Here it is.
I don't want to get you.
Go ahead.
I don't want to get you too far off this.
No, you're good. I'm
Before you
off
look
anyway.
up Numbers 19 and 2, I'll tell you this.
Okay.
Years ago, when Brother Parrish preached here, he preached a sermon about the donkey. I don't know if anybody remembers that.
I think I do.
Pointed out what was so sufficient about the donkey. He went on to say this preaching that this donkey carried the sins and the burdens of the world on this donkey's back, which was Christ.
Okay.
So that was sufficient of his sermon though, because Jesus was on the donkey's back, and Jesus carries the burdens and the sins upon the donkey as he rode the donkey into town.
Right. Okay. And
I don't know if anybody
yeah.
remembers that one, but that's a summary of what he preached that time.
Yes. Edgar.
This might not be really significant to the subject, but in Matthew 21, verses 1 through 5, where it talks about that, bringing then Jesus sent two disciples, two people, to go to the village and bring a donkey and the colt.
Right.
But they brought them both to ride both of them, right?
It said that they put garments on both, and he rode their own, but he didn't ride two, did he?
Well, it says back in Zechariah 9 and 9, rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, the King cometh unto thee. He is just, having salvation, or bringing salvation, lowly, and riding upon a donkey and upon a colt.
Okay.
So it makes me think that the two disciples that he sent was the two that rode over in Matthew 21, where he sent two disciples to go to the donkey and the colt.
The two disciples rode the donkey and the goat.
It says here in 21, 21, then sent Jesus two disciples, go into the village, and straightway you should find a donkey and a colt, and bring them to me.
Okay. I've always had the impression, Edgar, you may be right, but I thought Jesus was one riding.
Yeah,
The colt.
I was just seeing it, because they reference it back to Zechariah.
Right.
That's where it says that they rode the donkey and upon the colt.
Right. Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9. We were going to go there, but that was prophesied hundreds of years before it actually happened, what we're reading here in Luke chapter 19. Yeah, and he's telling Jerusalem, you people of Jerusalem, the king's coming riding upon a donkey or a goat or whatever it might have been. But again, to me, that's not much of a big grand entrance, Linda. Notice Esther chapter 6. Remember the king and Haman? Remember Haman? Haman was the one who just was in love with himself. And he hung on the king, and he buttered the king up all the time, and he just loved himself. Notice Esther, and the king had been reminded of what Mordecai, the Jew, had done for him. Mordecai had warned the king, some of the king's people, there was an assassination attempt, and that was, of course, avoided. The king was reminded of Mordecai, and he said, well, we need to do something for Mordecai. Notice Esther chapter 6, verse 4. And the king said, who's in the court out there? Now Haman was coming to the outward court of the king's house to speak unto the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. And the king's servant said unto the king, well, Haman's out there. And the king said, well, tell him to come in here. Verse 6, and so Haman came in, and the king said unto him, you know, what shall be done unto the man whom the king would just delights to honor? And Haman thought in his heart, here's old Haman now, to whom would the king delight to do honor more than to me? He wants to honor me, Linda, and he wants to know what I think, how I need to be honored. He was full of himself. Notice the next verse. Now here's a triumphal entry. Now, if you want to, somebody that was really honored. For verse 8, Haman's answer, he said, well, let the royal apparel be brought which the king wears, and the horse that the king rides on, and the crown royal which is set upon the king's head. And let this apparel and this horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that they may array the man with all whom the king delights to honor, and bring him on the horseback through the street of the city, and proclaim before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. They're going to put this guy, he thinks in his mind, I'm going to be riding the king's horse. The old black horse with the silver saddle on it. And we're going to get one of the king's princes to lead me around on this horse through the town and tell everybody the king wants to honor this fellow riding on his horse here. That would be a triumphal parade. That ain't what Jesus did. What no silver saddle. He's riding a donkey into town, and who wants somebody like that to be their king? Think about it. I'm going to jump on this bandwagon now. We've got him loaded. We got him loaded on the back of this donkey now, and we're fixing to go into town. Jesus humbled himself. There was no pride there. No prancing horse with a silver saddle. Him riding on the thing. He's riding on the back of a borrowed donkey. And here we go into Jerusalem. Verse 31 through 34, let's look at them together. If anybody asks you when you get there, well, wait a minute, what are you doing? You're going to find a tied donkey now when you get there. You go there and untie him and bring him here where I am. And if they ask you, what are you doing? Why are you untying my donkey? They didn't ask the guy, can we borrow him in a minute? Did Jesus know the colt was there?
Yes.
Yeah, he knew the colt was there. Did he know the owner of the colt would let him go?
I would say yes.
Yeah. No, notice something. Go back with me to John.
The owner of the colt knew the Lord.
I think so.
Because he said, if I need him.
The Lord needs him. Who's the Lord?
Ricky, if I needed your four-wheeler, you wasn't home.
Take it.
I go in there and get it. Pat comes out and says, what are you doing? Oh, I'm borrowing the four-wheeler. I got something stuck. I got to go to a fire. I got to do
Sure.
You know me and I know you, and you have a relationship with us. I can do that.
Yeah.
So yes, I think the owner of the donkey knew the Lord.
I think he did. Go back to now John chapter 11. We're going to get to 12 in just a minute. John chapter 11 is the account again of Lazarus. He's dead. John chapter 11, verse 19. Notice that, and many of the Jews came to Mary and Martha to comfort them concerning their brother. There was a lot of Jewish kinfolks, neighbors, friends there at their house because Lazarus, their brother, had died. Where else am I going with this? Verse, looks like 45. Is there a 45 here? We got many Jews there. Verse 45, John chapter 11, then many of the Jews which came to Mary and had seen the things which Jesus did, they believed on him. This has happened now in Bethany, remember, on the Mount of Olives here. We got many Jews there who were an eyewitness to Lazarus being raised from the dead. Notice John chapter 12 now, verse 9, much people of the Jews therefore knew that he was there. People had heard that Jesus now is at Bethany at Mary and Martha and Lazarus' house. They knew he was there. They came not only for Jesus' sake, but they might see Lazarus also, whom he had raised from the dead. This crowd of folks is getting bigger now. Notice verse 12. The next day, after that, much people that were come to the feast when they heard that when Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, they took branches off the palm trees. Jesus was well known in that neck of the woods. They knew what he had done for Lazarus at that time. Notice verse 17, John chapter 12, verse 17 and 18. The people therefore that was with him when he called Lazarus out of his grave and had raised him from the dead, that they bear record. They began to tell other folks. Now this group is getting bigger, and they're among him now. He's back at Bethany, and we're fixing to go to Jerusalem and anoint him as our king. This is a big deal. Go ride on a donkey though, but that's okay. They're telling much people what had happened. Notice verse 18, because of this, for this cause the people also met him coming out of Jerusalem, for they had heard that he had done this miracle. People had saw the miracle, people had heard about the miracle, people were telling them about the miracle. They're coming out of Jerusalem now to meet him. Because he's fixing to come into Jerusalem now, and we're going to anoint him as our king. And I guess we'll have to stop there. We're out of time. Anyone have any comments? We'll start there, Lord willing, next week. We're going to see Jesus as he goes into town now, and what's going to happen when he gets there. Go ahead, Bernal.
This is how poor for worldly goods and things that Christ, Jesus had. He had the borrowed donkey to ride on.
Had a borrowed donkey.
Nowhere in the scripture says everywhere he went, he walked.
Yes.
This is the first time I guess he's ever been on a back of an animal.
Yes.
So
Yes.
he done all his walking and talking and preaching.
Yep.
During his ministry.
Yep. And he chooses to ride on the back of a borrowed donkey. Pretty humble. I don't think I'd have rode on the donkey. I'd want a nice horse anyway, with a nice saddle. At least they could have done that.